Ms. Highsmith, tell us a little about yourself. Tell us the life story of the famous Patricia Highsmith.
Well, first off, I was born on January 19th, 1921, in my hometown of Fort Worth, Texas. My birth name is Mary Patricia Klangman, and my parents were Jay Klangman and Mary Coates. My parents divorced 10 days after I was born. What great parents they were, huh? My mom did eventually remarry to this man, who was an artist, Stanley Highsmith, and he eventually became my adopted stepfather. So that's why my last name is Highsmith. And pretty much most of my young life involved me living with my grandma and my mom and stepfather. My grandmother lived in a boarding house in Fort Worth, Texas, and my mom and stepfather lived in Manhattan, New York. I would move back and forth within those two houses until I finally moved to New York, which would start my career in writing.
Wow. You seem to have had an interesting childhood. How's your relationship with your family now? Your grandmother, your mom and stepfather? How about your birth father?
I will be forever thankful, and I will always love my grandmother, because she was the one who took care of me of the earlier part of my life. But much more importantly, she was the one who introduced me into the beautiful world of reading and writing. At an early age, she taught me how to read, which I believe contributed to me blossoming into the writer that I am today. Although I really love my grandmother, it wasn't always happy times with her. The issue wasn't so much her, but my mother. When my mother remarried, she took me with her and her new husband to move to Manhattan. When I turned 12, she sent me back to Fort Worth to come live with my grandmother. Though I love my grandmother and I eventually did come back to New York to live with my mom, I felt I felt so abandoned and betrayed that she would just leave me to live with my grandma. That year I lived with my grandma, and it was honestly the saddest year of my life.
You seem to have had issues with your mother. Where is this coming from? And how did this affect you and your writing?
It's it's a complicated subject for me, but okay. My mother and I don't have the best relationship. I, I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it. I guess the fact that her and my birth father divorced at an early age, and that I sort of just had to accept my stepfather as my own, kind of contributed to it. And even to this day, I don't really accept my stepfather. But some of it stems from this one conversation that I had with my mother. She once told me that when she was pregnant, she, she, she tried to abort me by drinking turpentine. That really disturbed me and just caused me to develop a rocky relationship with my mother. The love and hate relationship I have with my mother has never really been resolved and has stuck with me for the rest of my life. I guess you could say that it kind of affected my writing in a way that this resentment from my mother has been stuck with me. I wrote a short story called Terrapin. It's about a boy who stabs his mother to death. Go figure.
Your books and stories have a very dark psychological theme to them. Where do you think this comes from? They're not just any type of crime and the thriller stories that you hear all the time, but they have this interesting, like, psychological edge to them that, you don't really see a lot.
You know, I have to say, I've always been fascinated with mental disorders and psychological problems. When I was very young, I read this book by Carl Menninger called The Human Mind, and it really fascinated me. That's why I always incorporate some crazy mental factor into my book characters. I could also say that I developed writing this way by practicing writing about people in my diary, like neighbors, and I'm giving them psychological problems and murderous paths that fade within their normal personality.
That's incredible. Is that how you developed Mr. Ripley's character in the talented Mr. Ripley?
Yes, but Mr. Ripley was definitely a lot more different than my other work. After writing the talented Mr. Ripley, I wrote four more novels also featuring Mr. Ripley. As you can tell, I definitely spent more time developing Mr. Ripley and creating him and his persona. I definitely see Mr. Ripley as my alter ego. She does the stuff that I sometimes think about doing. Uh, I I see a little of myself in Mr. Ripley. A little of myself also reflects on Mr. Ripley because he shows a lot of discontent of his life, and that is why he desperately tries to adapt Dickie's lifestyle. I wouldn't say I'm totally discontent with my life. I mean, I've been made rich due to my writing skills, but like Mr. Ripley lacks love, companionship, and the glamorousness in life. One could say I also do as well.
So you've written many novels and short stories now, all with the crime and murder theme, and also as I said, with the psychological and mental edge. But you also include the theme of homosexuality in some of your writings. My question is, was Mr. Ripley gay, and was that what powered him to pursue his actions in committing murder and committing theft? Did he fall in love with Dickie?
It is true that homosexuality is a theme in my work, although I would not necessarily connect that part to Mr. Ripley.
Mr. Ripley very much admired Dickie, and his discontent of himself could have forced him to go overboard and go crazy. Even Marge, Dickie's girl, suspected of Mr. Ripley being gay. Did Mr. Ripley fall in love with Dickie, but ended up killing him because he knew they could not be together? So he took over his life and acted as Dickie to fulfill the void?
I see where you're coming from, but no. Mr. Ripley was simply discontent with his life and wanted the wealth and glamour of Dickie's life. What I tried to express in Mr. Ripley is a person's self-struggle for self-acceptance and personal happiness. Mr. Ripley wanted Dickie's life because wealth and glamour. But even after what he but even after he got what he wanted, he still wasn't very happy and kept the guilt of the murder in his head. The paranoia of it all kept Mr. Ripley going on forever. Bliss could never reach Mr. Ripley because he doesn't accept himself. So later on in the series, when he's rich and all, he does get married with a woman. Even with the money and the relationship with a woman, Mr. Ripley is still not happy.
At the end of it all, what can we conclude about Mr. Ripley?
The message I tried to send with Mr. Ripley is a troubled soul who potentially could have found the answers for his self-struggle when he met Dickie. Dickie possessed the life of a rich, classy man who lived a lifestyle of whom Mr. Ripley wanted to be a part of. Things take a turn for the worse for Mr. Ripley, and when he senses rejection from Dickie, and before Dickie could break it off, he killed him, and did the only one thing that was better than being part of Dickie's lifestyle: be Dickie. His quest for self-content for his life ended up bad for him, and even after getting what he really wanted and going to kill two people over it, he is still personally self-conflicted with himself.